I am way behind schedule on this engine, so I'm ready to have it back together and back into the X5. So we're going to get right into getting all these new parts put onto this engine. Okay, so in the last X5 episode, we found out that the main bearings were less than ideal to reuse. And I said in there that I would like to have new bearings to roll into this engine so that we're starting fresh with bearings and can go from there. Well, I have bearings now. I have brand new bearings to go into this engine. And instead of rolling them in, I really want to pull this crank out to make sure that everything is clean and that there's no dirt or anything behind the bearings or anything like that. This engine is relatively clean, but there's still dirt here and there, and it just makes me feel a lot better if I can just pull this out, clean everything properly, put it back in. So that is my plan. But in order to do that, I have to loosely put the main caps back on. And then I left the rear main on when I put this engine on the stand. So I need to pull it off the stand, pull this rear main out, or at least unbolt it to where I can pull the crank up, which I might be able to do on the stand. We'll figure that out. And then the other thing is the timing chain and timing cover are still attached up front here. So we still have the timing chain all the way hooked up to the cams. And I have new timing chain, new tensioners, new guides, whole kit for this engine. So that needs to come apart anyways. So we got to flip the motor back over, pull the injectors and the valve cover off so we can put the timing tool on there and get those off. And then we can pull the crank out and clean everything and just make sure that this is good to go and we can get the new bearings in. So I'm going to be putting at least 3 of these main caps on because the only thing holding this crank in right now are 4 rods and pistons. And when I undo the timing chain and the rear main, I don't want the weight of the crank to potentially pull those down and out of the cylinders or hit the oil squirters. So we're going to put 3 caps on, probably the last 2 and the middle one, just to hold the crank in here until I actually want to pull it. And then we're going to try and loosen up this rear main in preparation for flipping the motor back over and then going after the timing chain. So let's get those 3 on there. So we have main cap number 7, which is this last guy. And we're on that today. Okay. Put our old bolts back in here. Then we have main cap number 4. And then number 1. Just making sure that the grooves it's relatively seated in so I don't make any impressions in the block that I don't want to. Okay. Alright, so now we'll use 13 mil. Get these 2 big guys off, and then we're going to see if we can sneak a 10 mil in here. And if I can just slide this off the dowels that it has, then ideally I can just pull it out with the crank when I do pull it, and I don't have to pull the engine off the stand. Yeah, okay. So since these 10 mils are running into the engines, the nuts holding this adapter on, I will have to save this for when I have the engine flipped back over. I can hook a chain up to it, pull it off the engine stand, then pull the rear main off, and then put it back on the engine stand to pull off the crank. That didn't work. So now we're going to focus on the timing chain then. Okay, well, I wasn't planning on taking this engine back off the stand. I should have took the rear main off before I put it on the stand, but anyways, you live and learn. So I'm putting this lift bracket back up front here so that I can then safely pull this engine off. And then I will need to take this back off because there's a pin behind it for one of the timing chain guides. So we're going to get this back on here. We're going to pull this engine off, get the rear main off, and put it back on the engine stand. Start up top. Okay, now I can pull this rear main. Okay, now I can go back on the stand. Okay, so now I'm going to pull all 6 injectors, use a slide hammer to pull those out, and then we're going to pull the valve cover off, and then that'll allow us access to the camshafts to put those locked in position. And I'm just going to break these loose by hand to make sure I don't break any of these studs. Okay, so then we're going to use this injector puller. It's BMW specific, and it just makes pulling these super easy. That one's got some corrosion on it. So number 4, I'm assuming the first 4 are all original. 5 and 6 are more common to be replaced, but that one was stuck in there. Okay, so number 1 has the copper washer still down in there. If it's stuck to the bottom, this tool also has these threads that you can thread into there and pull it up. This one I can see is just sitting at the bottom there, kind of crooked, fell off the injector. So I'm just going to use a pick very carefully, go down in there and fish it out. Okay, so that one flattened out, so I'm going to use a different pick to get this copper washer out of the bottom. It's like this weird curved one. Very carefully go down in there with a flashlight so I can see what I'm doing. We're just going to pull that up, get that guy out. And the rest of these are very dirty, so before we go any farther, I'm going to vacuum everything out, vacuum the injector cup area out. Okay, so I have this great contraption, very high tech, that I have made for my vacuum so that I can get down into the injector holes, have it taped up so good you can't even see it with camo tape. And so we're just gonna clean all this up so when we pull the valve cover off, we're not getting a bunch of crap down into the cylinder, because past that injector tip area is right on top of the piston. So we're gonna get this all cleaned up real quick. So this was version 1.0, not work. This works much better. Thank you to my wife for having that. That allowed me to get down all the way down to the bottom and get everything out of there. So now we have all the injector holes cleaned up, and then now I feel more comfortable pulling this valve cover off without a bunch of crap going into the engine. Okay, so now we're going to pull this valve cover out. I'm going to remove these 10 millimeters, the studs for the injectors up in the middle, and then 10 millimeters outside. We're going to start in the middle. I'm going to undo it by hand, make sure that nothing snaps. Now you're going to lightly pry. So now we're going to be timing these so we can remove the timing chain, get this cleaned up so we don't get a bunch of crap in here. Then we're going to get our tool mounted to here, should bolt into this injector area, and then it's going to slide around this exhaust cam and lock these in place. So now we're going to just clean up this surface, get this all cleaned up while we have this off, keep dirt from going into the engine. and then the middle portion here. Okay, now we're going to be putting the tool on. Grab this tool. So I need to turn it over until I can slide this around this exhaust cam. Okay, so I need to turn over the engine to basically get it at top dead center so that the intake and exhaust cam are aligned to each other. And then I need to pull this plug out. This is where the tensioner is for the upper timing chain that goes from intake cam around the injection pump and then back to intake cam. And then there's another one that goes around here down to the crank and back. Access to both tensioners is through this plug. Now, the only procedure I can find for this is in iron block E46 one, and their timing is slightly different up here. Their timing chain design is slightly different up here up top. So I kind of have to figure out how to compress this tensioner so that I can get this out, because you can't pull the timing cover until you get the chain out of the way and one of the guides up here, because there's a bolt right about here straight down that guide is in the way of. So we're going to be somewhat figuring this out as we're going, and we're going to get through it. So first off, I need everything at top dead center so that it's aligned, so that I can get this tool here aligned here, actually on the intake cam, and get that aligned and everything. So let's get this cranked over. Let me make sure I'm not running into anything. Yeah, you can cut the camera. Okay, so I took a couple minutes to make sure that the rod bearings that I took off on 1 and 6 a while ago were put back on so that my crank isn't running into them and causing issues. So now we can turn this over without having any problems. All right, so we have this timing tool on here. It's a very tight fit. We have it flat to the head surface here, and then it is around the intake cam. And then just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, we are going to get this piece clamped down like so. That's not going anywhere. So now we have the intake and exhaust cam timed. Now we just need to focus on getting the tensioner for this upper chain compressed so that we can get this gear off and then the guides out. Okay, so now we're going to pull this plug. This is going to give us access to the chain tensioners. This is a 17 millimeter Allen. Get that plug out, and that's going to allow us to put the pin in here for this upper tensioner. So we just need to compress it, and then we can put a pin in it. All right, and while we're at it, we're going to pull off this lift bracket too, because this is it's blocking a pin to get one of these guides out. How do I want to get this tensioner? Should probably loosen up this gear, but I need to turn over the engine to do that, which means I have to take the timing mark. That thing. So this is not going to work. So this timing tool and the procedure that I have, well, this timing tool will work for this engine, but the procedure that I have is for a M57 pre-TU or pre-TU2, which is really just pre-revision, and this is the final revision of the M57 and aluminum block. So I had the procedure that's readily available was for the E46 iron block that they got overseas. So kind of irrelevant for this setup because the timing chain setup is different. On the earlier engines, the chain here goes across the exhaust and the intake cam. So you can lock the intake cam and then twist the exhaust and it will compress that tensioner. That won't work on this one because we only have one chain going around a secondary sprocket on the intake cam. So we don't need this. I did find the procedure. It's not easy to find. And it states that basically we don't need this tool. We need to go counterclockwise, and we're going to need to remove the third sprocket bolt that holds on the secondary sprocket that's hidden down here. So we need to remove that when it's up here. So there's two here. You can see there's a third one down here. Remove that, and then we need to turn the camshaft and everything to about where we have it now, or 45 degrees back from TDC. And then we need to hold the crank. Ideally, you were to pin it in the back there, but that requires a flex plate, and I don't have a flex plate on here, and I'm not pulling this thing back off the stand to put a flex plate on it. So we're just going to hold the crank, and if we spin the exhaust cam, then it's going to turn the intake cam. That's going to compress the tensioner, and then we can pin the tensioner, and then we can undo that, remove these two bolts, remove the secondary sprocket, remove the guides, and then we can get to the bolt that holds on this timing cover that's hidden underneath all of this. So once we have all that done, then we can remove the timing cover and get moving with this timing chain removal. Now, I could have done this the wrong way per se. I mean, I could just rip this apart, meaning I could just pull this sprocket off and let the tensioner fly, and that would get it apart, and then going back together really wouldn't be an issue because the tensioner is going to be compressed, and as long as this all works, blah, blah, blah. But I want to do it the right way. So we're going to do it the right way, as close to it as I can. And so we're going to remove this bolt, turn it back 45. We're going to get rid of this timing tool, which it does. This timing tool does work. It'd be nice to hold the cams where you want to hold them just for peace of mind, but we don't need it right now for this procedure. So we're going to get rid of this timing tool. Then we're going to turn this all back, get that bolt out, and go from there. All right, so let's turn this back. Now we can remove this screw. And then we can go back this way. So now we can turn the exhaust cam and then compress that tensioner. Oh, wow. That's working really good. Plus this exhaust cam, guess what size it is? 21. Now we're going to turn this exhaust ever so slightly, and just like that. Now we have a pinned tensioner. And now we can remove these pins and these two screws and get that out of the way. Pull this guy out, and then we're going to get this chain off. Pull this sprocket out. Down falls the chain. Then we're going to use a pick, and we're going to get out this other guide. Oh, I see. You might want me to remove the cams. Okay, well, I'm fighting with getting this other guide out of here, and the procedure states that you need to remove the camshafts. So I guess I'm removing the camshafts, which I wasn't really planning on doing, but that will allow us to get that out of there and then be able to get to the bolt. Because the bolt, if you'll believe it, is stuck underneath the guide that's fighting us. So now we're going to remove these camshafts. We're going to start in the middle, work our way out, half turn increments. So basically we're just going to loosen them up by hand and turn them out because some of these have tension on them from the valve springs. We don't want to warp the camshafts in any way. So we're going to start on the intake. Just break them loose. Okay, and these need to be kept in order. So you want to keep those in order because the machine surfaces of these lobes have kind of ingrained themselves to each other. So you don't want to mix them up because any slight imperfections can cause unusual wear if you were to mix them up, which BMW does label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. the A side is your exhaust side, and the E side is your intake side. Why that is, I don't know. I'm not the engineer that got that mixed up. It probably is German. But I shouldn't actually need to remove the exhaust cam. Yeah, so I should be able to just rotate this up, pull the intake cam out. Ideally, you want to stand it up, but just for a short period, we're going to lay it down on the table over there. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, the guide out of the way, that gives us access to the bolt that's hidden down in here. We're going to remove this timing cover and get the other chain off the crank down here, so eventually we can get that crank out of the way. So we got a bunch of T40s and then these Allen head 6 mils up here, and then we should be able to get this timing cover off. Okay, now let's carefully pry this guy off. There we go. It's easy. Then this is our upper chain we can pull off. Now we can compress this tensioner and get that pinned. Perfect. Should probably remove the injection, which is a 21. I'm removing the injection pump pulley, and I need my special tool for this. Now we can use this tool, and so this is the tool that pushes the injection pump gear off of it so that I can pull the chain off, because it's a taper fit onto that, so you have to pop it off, essentially press it off. So then that should allow me to get this plug boy off. Okay. There we are. There's our lower, and then our oil pump chain. So both those off. That's going to be all of our timing chain. And then we'll remove this tensioner. We're going to replace this, clean out this oil squirter, and then should be good to go. We're going to clean this off, and then we'll be able to remove the crank now without any issues. So good to go. Come on, go back in your home. Okay, so now that we have the timing chain off, we have the rear main off, we've gotten that taken care of, we're going to now pull the crank out so that we can thoroughly clean it and get it prepped for new bearings. We are keeping the rods and pistons inside the motor, but we're going to be cleaning the rod end that connects to the crankshaft, making sure that that's good for the bearing install. Normally, you would check the clearance on this stuff, but there's a couple reasons as to why I'm comfortable putting regular size bearings in this and running it. One, this crank's never been ground. The journals are in great shape, and based on all the markings from BMW on their grinding with the yellow marks and green marks, it looked like this crank is well within spec. So I'm comfortable putting just standard bearings in this, torquing everything to spec, and then moving on with life. So that is my plan for this. So we're going to be cleaning this up, getting new hardware. We have new rod bolts. We also have new main bearing bolts. All right, so now we're going to pull this crank out. We're going to get it down here so that we can start cleaning it and then get the block area cleaned as well. Okay. Don't fall. Okay, now we're going to be cleaning this up. We're going to use brake clean. We're going to clean out all of these oil galleries, make sure that's all cleaned up, make sure there's no dirt on it. We're also going to clean up the engine block area where the other main bearings sit, as well as the rod bearings, clean those up. and get it all prepped for the new bearings to go in. I'm going to pull off this timing sprocket, get that out of the way, as well as the O-ring behind it. Okay, I'm also shooting into these oil galleries. Make sure there's no dirt in there as I put my stupid rag on the floor. Flip this over. There's that all cleaned up and ready to go. Looking good. Alright, now let's prep the block now. Now we're going to remove these old bearings, if I can, from our rods and main area, and then we're just going to clean all this up. Get rid of all the old oil and all the dirt. Get it cleaned up, ready for new bearings. Alright, so now that we have this all cleaned up, then we can clean up our main caps and the other side of our rods with the rod caps, and then we can get new bearings put in here on the top side of the rods as well as the upper main bearings. Then we'll get the crank back in here and get everything tightened back up. Alright, we're going to get these bearings installed into the block here. So we're going to start with the thrust bearing in the middle. So we have the oil galleries here. I just need to make sure they're lined up. We have these bearings here with the oil gallery there, and then the groove for oil. And the only one that really matters is this middle one because it has thrust. All the others are identical. So, and then you just got to make sure that they're flat here, as flat as possible. Once you bolt the main cap down, it's going to push it where it needs to be, but you don't want it pushing too much. Okay, and while we have the crank out of the way, we're going to get these upper rod bearings in as well. Okay. Then we got number 3 going in. And I'm making sure that bearings that are packaged with each other in their pairs are staying in the same rod together. Then we got number 2. And lastly, number 1. And now we're going to prep the main caps and rod caps, and then we'll slather this in assembly lube and get the crank back in here. Now let's get some assembly lube on here. Now let's get the crank set back in there. Beautiful. Alright, we'll get some more assembly lube and then get the main caps on and those rod caps. So we want to use assembly lube because we don't want a dry start when we go to start this thing, and especially with engine builders that are building engines and they're going to sit on a shelf, assembly lube is key because it's not going to just drain out of the journals as it sits there on the shelf. So, for a short start like we have here, we could probably just use regular oil, but I'm just using assembly lube because it's what I trust to do it, and it is sticky stuff. Now we got this main cap here, number 7, making sure that our tongs are against each other. Yeah, so we have tongs on this side, so we want the locators of this bearing to meet with the other locators so that the bearing doesn't spin. So if you were to put it this way, the bearing could easily spin this way. or vice versa. But you don't want that. You want those tongs against each other. So we got that down. Main bearing 6, main cap 6, 5. Got main 4 here, which is thrust. I'll make sure there's some lubrication on that thrust bearing. I'm gonna put that in there. Okay, and then per BMW, they want these main bearing bolts to be oiled. So we'll dip them in some oil on the threads. Get those going in. These are the updated ones. The ones we took out were hexes. These are e-torques now. Okay, and then we're going to run those down. These are E14s. Run them down with my impact in the lowest setting. Okay. A lot of engine builders won't even touch an engine with assembly with an impact, but it's more efficient for just bringing the bolts in. And if you do it on the lowest setting, you're not fatiguing the bolt or doing anything negative, in my opinion. Each engine builder has their own opinion on that, but in mine, it doesn't hurt for going in there. Obviously, I'm not going to go on the highest setting and just ugga-dugga them, but for bringing them in, and then I don't want to over torque them, especially with these main bearing bolts. They're very torque specific. They're one time use torque to yield bolts, so they're torqued to a certain foot pound, and then angle torqued after that. So they're going right to their stretching point. So they have the most clamping power. And those are one time use because you're stretching them to a certain point. And technically, you can only use those once. Same thing goes for the rod bearing bolts. So I don't want to over torque these. So I'm going with this lowest setting to just bring them in there. Now we're going to get these rod caps on. We can start with the middle two because they're on the journals for the crank. We'll start with those two. We have upgraded ARP bolts for those as well, and then we'll pull these other pistons up to their journals. So we got 3 and 4, and again, these are not only cracked caps, meaning that they are literally snapped in half, so they are married to each side and each rod. They can only go on one way. The other way to check that is, again, you want the tongs on the bearing to be with each other, and then that'll meet up nicely. So then we can get our bolts in there, and we're going to be using ARP's supplied lubrication for this. So we're going to put a little on the bolt head here, and then on the threads themselves. And then ARP has a certain torque spec for this. So spread that around, get that started. And then we're going to bring those with our lowest setting on the impact. And now we will do number 4 here. Again, tongs to tong. And then we'll grab the hardware for that. Spread around like usual. Start it by hand. And we'll run this one down too. Now we can turn this over. Actually, I think I'm just gonna try and let me see if I can pull these guys up. Alright, so we'll grab a pick. Pull these guys up. Go. Might as well pull these guys up while we're at it. I'm gonna be careful not to just ram it into your crank. You don't want to put a divot in your bearing journal. So you're getting close, you just slow down. Beautiful. Number 2 here, tong to tong. Very nice. We'll go with 1 while we're over here. Tong to tong. Okay, and now that I've got my gloves extra dirty, I'm going to get the rest of these bolts in before I grab my impact. Number 5 and number 6. So we're going to start with our rod bolts. Those are torqued to 36 foot-pounds. 36 foot-pounds says ARP. So we'll get those torqued down, 36 foot-pounds. And we'll start with number 1 so we can keep track. And then we're double checking the meeting of the crack on the rods are lining up correctly, which they are. Okay, let's get these main bearings torqued down. First sequence is 25 Newton meters. 25 Newton meters starting from the middle, working out. Okay, and then secondary 50 Newton meters. Okay, and then they want 60 degrees of rotation twice. Then BMW wants you to loosen all bolts at least 180 degrees proceeding from outside inward. Isn't that a curveball? Outside inward. So I'm just going to go backwards of what I did. 180 degrees. 180 degrees. 180 degrees. 180. Okay, and then we're going to redo that. So 25, 50, 60, and 60. And what I'm going to do first, just to help keep track since this is the last time I'm going through it, I'm going to clean off the top of these bolts a little bit. And then I'm going to take a fresh paint marker. I'm going to mark them for each thing. 25 Newton meters. Okay, and now we do 50. Okay, and now we do our double 60 on everything. There's all 4 stages done. Bearings are officially installed. Now that we're done with this part, we're going to be moving on to getting the rest of this bottom end buttoned up. So we're going to get the brace on here. We'll get our oil pump with its chain hooked up to the front. We're going to clean out the X5 pickup tube and use that. And then we'll be getting the oil pan put on here eventually as well. Okay, so we're going to be putting the oil pump on here. There's also a brace or girdle, whatever you want to call it, here that goes across. And then we'll have the X5 E70 all-wheel drive specific pickup tube that goes here. We have cleaned that up since we are reusing that from the old motor. And then the oil pump, I cleaned up a little bit too, but that is from the 335D motor that's original to this engine. So that didn't have any bearing failure. So that pump is good to go. So we're going to get that installed. We are reusing the chain previously for the oil pump. And then we're going to get all that together. And then we can focus on a couple of other things. Okay, now we're going to torque down these bolts. And then just for peace of mind, I'm going to put a little dot on them so I know that I did them. Okay, so now we're going to get this chain and sprocket put onto this oil pump. So now we're going to flip this motor back over and we can work on some stuff up front, trying to get this timing chain system together. I'm going to wait until the timing cover up front is on and the rear main is back on before we put the oil pan, so that I can seal up these areas over here properly. All right, so I had the high pressure pump. I resealed this off camera real quick and also swapped over to the X5 one because I know that that one works. Vehicle ran, so we swapped over to that. So now we're going to get this old tensioner out of the way, and then we'll start getting the new tensioner and the guides in place for this lower timing chain to go on, and then we'll have the upper timing chain go on. Okay, and we have our new OE tensioner going in. Okay, now we're torquing these to spec. Little M6 bolts are only 8 Newton meters. Okay, now let's get this on here. Okay, so we have this together. We have this lower chain on. We have the front one mocked up there. We have the new guides together with the new tensioner. I have not pulled the pin yet on the tensioner. We need to make sure that the crank is in the right spot for the cams, because we already have everything at the correct spot with the cams. So we need to make sure that the cylinder 1 piston is in top dead center, so that we are able to get everything timed correctly. But we have the oil pump chain on, we have the lower chain, and then we will torque this to 65 Newton meters later on. And once we pull this pin for the lower chain, we can get this case on and then deal with everything up top. All right, so this is a very different setup. We have gone full backyard mechanic and put the engine on a tire, because in order to get the crank in the proper position for the timing chain, we need the flex plate on so that we can lock the crank in the correct position. So we have done that. We've taken it back off the engine stand, put a flex plate on the back, put the special tool in to lock the crank, and now we know that this is in the proper position. We can now pull this pin, lock the lower chain. We can get this timing cover put on, and then we can start working on the upper chain and get that in time. But we have to have this cover on because of that hidden bolt here. We have to have that all torqued down, ready to go before we start messing with everything up top. So we are going to get that now. I'm just going to, now that we have this all good, this is torqued to spec, chains in proper position, guides are good. We're going to pull this pin, if it'll let us. Now that's under tension. That's good to go. So now we can get this cover on. I've already put a new front main on it, and we'll get that together. Okay, so we have our new metal gasket here to go on first. Oh, well, isn't that interesting? They want you to put the gasket on before you put the chains on. Okay. So those of you that knew from the beginning that I should have put the gasket in first, I'm sure already commented that, but they want you to put the gasket behind the chain. So I had to take apart this lower chain again and reset the tensioner, pull all this off, pull that off, put the gasket in, then retorque this, get everything back together. Now we have right back to where we were, but now we have the gasket in the right spot. So now we can put the front timing cover on with the front main and then get everything torqued back up. So now we get to do that. And get these timing cover bolts in. Just had to clean them up, get all the old oil off of them. While we're down here, we're going to be putting in our new water pump, since it uses the same gasket. Get this installed. Alright, and then we're going to torque these to 10 Newton meters. Okay, and then we'll torque the water pump while we're here. And then we have these M8 bolts going down. Those are torqued to 24 Newton meters. Alright, so next we're going to remove again the intake cam so that we can get both guides down in there, because we can't squeeze this left one here that goes on the tensioner around it. So we're going to pull this cam out, get both those guides in place and the sprocket in place, and then get all this finalized. So now we're going to pull this intake cam out, and just like the first time, we're going to start in the middle and slowly work our way out and bring this cam up slowly. It does have the pressure of the valve springs on it, and we don't want that pushing too hard on it or in the wrong spots and warping the cam or snapping the cam, whatever. Okay, get this cam up and out of the way, and we can get this guy down in here, and we can get the pin put in. Alright, so we got a clean pin here with some sealant on the threads. Okay, so now we can put the cam back in and clean up these journals here. Also clean up the cam. Okay, now that we have that cleaned up, put a little assembly lube on there. Now when we're going in, I want to make sure that these cams are lined up. They're good. Get some assembly lube on top before we put each cam cap on. And then I'm going to clean up each cam cap before I put them on. So we have E1 up front here facing the exhaust side, because from the exhaust side of the engine, you want to be able to read what each cap says. Grab my wrench, and we're going to turn these. They're lined up. Well, they're in time with each other, but we want to line them up like BMW wants us to. There's 2 dots on the exhaust cam and 1 dot on the intake cam. I want the 1 dot in between the 2, and then you want those horizontal. You want them in line with each other exactly like this, so that when you put the sprocket on, it's timed with the crank. Okay, so now that we have that done, we can get the sprocket in here and push that over this way. Then we can get that guide down in there. So the sprocket, clean up the sprocket. So then, thank you for your service, holding my chain. Perhaps I should get the guide in there first, because that does not look like enough room. come back. I need your help again. Hold that. Thank you. Then take this guy, and there's a pin down in there that we want to slide it onto, just like that. Double check that's on there. Yep. Beautiful. All right, now we can get the sprocket in here. I want to get the sprocket close to where it was before. And right now it's slot off, which really doesn't matter as long as, they're in time with the crank. But I would feel much better if it was close to how it was. It'll let me. Perfect. Okay, so then we can get 2 of these sprocket bolts in. We can also put that pin in, and we are right where we were before previously, so that is good. Okay, and then we'll get that pin put in. Now that we have these pins in, we have the guides on. This guide is correct. That is started. These are still loose for when the tensioner starts going. Okay, so we have the crank pinned. That is correct. We have the cams lined up with each other. Beautiful. So I can pull the tensioner. Your consent, engine. I can pull the tensioner. Okay. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. All right. Well, now we have to torque these to spec, especially before the sealant dries. Torque these and torque the cam. All final torque down on those. And then we'll put this cap back in, tighten down both these caps. So next we're going to work on the valve cover. We're going to get that resealed and then get it ready for our injectors that were in the X5. And we're going to get those resealed and then put into their place as well. Okay, I can't find a torque spec for these pins. BMW Procedure doesn't list one. But these are 14 newton meters on these. These are M7 bolts. And then these M6s on the caps are 8 newton meters. So we're going to get those torqued down. And I'm just going to click. Now you can work on these caps. Bring this down to 8 newton meters. And since I have these all hand tight, I'm just going to go walk my way down here. Beautiful. Okay. Now I need to get this third bolt into the sprocket and torque that to spec. But that means I have to turn over the engine, which means I need to pull the pin on the crank. But my flex plate is running into my tire in the back. So I'm going to remove the flex plate, remove the crank pin, and then I'll be able to turn over the engine. And at that same time, I can put the rear main on. Kill 2 birds, 1 stone, because I need the rear main on before it goes back onto the stand anyways. So let me do that. I'm going to do that in the back of the engine. Take the flex plate off, take that crank pin out, and then we can turn over the engine by just putting these bolts back in here. These are old bolts, by the way. These are not new bolts. They've already been stretched once, so this is about all they're good for before they go into the trash. So we can use that, turn it over, and then we can get the valve cover on, because I want to obviously put that bolt in before the valve cover goes on and seals it all up. Okay, so before we get to putting this valve cover on, we're going to replace this rear main real quick, get this cleaned up, and then once we're done with the valve cover and we want to pull this oil pan back off and get other stuff done, we don't have to worry about this rear main, and we can seal it properly down here in these joints. So we have a new rear main here with the install tool, so we're going to get that put on here. Okay, got the install tool. Good. Okay. There we go. Very good. Just needs a little tappy. Beautiful. pull this install tool off. We are reusing these bolts. BMW does not state you need to replace them, so we're going to use these guys. Get these torqued down. Got some M6 and M8 bolts. So then these small M6 ones are going to be 10 Newton meters, and it should be 19 on these larger guys. So now we have that installed. I'll mark these bolts so that we know we've torqued them. All right, so now we're going to be working on the valve cover. So we have a fresh gasket put into the valve cover itself. And before we do that, in these corners down here, this is where the vacuum pump goes. In these corners, BMW wants you to put some silicone so that that seals up properly. So we're going to clean that area out with some brake clean to make sure that there's no oil and nothing's going to keep our sealant from actually bonding and sealing properly. Let me get a pick, make sure we get down in there without scratching anything. And we're just going to do a quick wipe across the sealing surfaces, get everything clean. All right, so now we can put some RTV in that corner, and then we'll be able to put the cover itself on and get that torqued to spec. Okay, so we have sealant down in there. I have a fresh gasket on the valve cover itself, cleaned up as well. Make sure that the cam sensor is all cleaned up and ready to go. So now we can place this down. Good to go. Okay, and now we can grab all of our bolts and get those started. So all the non-studded bolts are going to go around the outside. Normally these bolts will stay captive inside the valve cover, but I did pull them out so that I could clean everything. So I'm just having to put a little pressure and get them started. Okay, and then we're going to get started putting our studded ones down in here. These are also the studs to hold down the injectors. BMW has a specific way they want you to tighten down these bolts. So you're going to start with these inside row here, and you're going to start from the inside and work your way out evenly. We're just going to start on cylinder 3 here. That's going to be in the middle. Now I just want to get all these started by hand before I bring them most of the way down on the lowest setting of my impact, because this torque spec on these is only 8 Newton meters, so we don't want to over torque them. Just going back and forth here. Okay, and we'll get those torqued to spec, which is 8 Newton meters. Great. Now on the outside, we just want to go diagonally back and forth. So we're just going to start here in the middle. All right, and then we'll come in, torque to spec. Okay, so now we have the valve cover on, torqued. Everything's good to go. Sealant's in the spot. So now we're going to reseal our injectors, and we're going to clean out their holes one more time with the vacuum and make sure that that's all good to go. Then we can get our injectors in here, get them torqued to spec, and then we can finally get this back up onto the engine stand, and we'll get the oil pan installed finally, because we had the rear main and the front timing cover fully installed. We can flip it over, get the oil pan fully installed, and then we're working on, well, one, cleaning up this engine because this is nasty, but I wanted it to be sealed up to be able to do that. So let's get our injectors resealed, and then we can get those installed. Okay, so we're going to be putting these injectors back in. These are the ones that came out of the X5 motor. We didn't have any issues, no issues codes with injectors or anything like that. Ran smooth besides the main bearing issue. So we're going to be reusing them. I did label them before I pulled them out of which cylinder they came out of, so then I don't have to recode to each cylinder which injector. So we have replaced the copper washer on the bottom, as well as this O-ring up here with a little bit of silicone spray on the new one. And we've cleaned it up. Most I use is a rag, and if the nozzle is pretty carboned up, then I will use a little bit of gray Scotch-Brite, like very fine Scotch-Brite. But you don't want to wire wheel because you don't want to hurt the nozzle holes where the fuel comes out of. So try not to use a wire wheel on those. So now we're going to be putting them in here. I've cleaned out these holes once more, made sure that the walls were in good shape, vacuumed them out. So now we can put these in, and we're going to be reusing the injector hold downs, but you want to make sure that you put these in there correctly, because otherwise the injector won't be fully seated. So you want them like that. Place this in, push it down, and that's cylinder 1. So now we're going to do all 6 there. Cylinder 2, 3, cylinder 4, number 5, and then lastly cylinder 6. And then we'll grab the nuts for these and get those started. These put on here. Little 8mm injector nuts. And then whoever was in here last on this X5 has the right thread, but it's the wrong nut. So we're going to steal one from what we pulled out of the spare motor. And those torque specs are 9 Newton meters. Okay, we're going to torque these to 9 Newton meters. Okay, there's the injectors installed. So now that we have these installed, we'll put an oil filter cap. The X5 has like an adapter that brings this up, but we'll just throw a cap on here, and then we're going to put some caps on here to make sure no dirt gets down in here, because this is the high pressure feed for fuel and we don't want anything going through these injectors. So we're going to cap these off, cap that, and then we're going to get this whole engine back up on the stand. Okay, so we're going to get the oil pan buttoned up. So I want to get the oil pan gasket on here. So we're going to pull this off. I only had 4 bolts in here to just hold this when I put it in the tire. So we're going to pull this off. New gasket, we need RTV or some type of sealant where the rear main and front timing cover go. So let's get this off and get started on that. Okay, get this one off. And we're going to clean up the sealing surface here. Now that we've got that cleaned up, we're going to be putting some RTV here, there. Then we'll grab our new oil pan gasket here, put this on. So then we're going to install this. Everything's torqued down, pickup tube, oil pump. Okay. Beautiful. There we go. Now we can get all of the bolts started. Got our extra long boys in the back here. Okay, and then our 4 M8 bolts that go up front. Okay, and these last 2 that go into the rear main. There we go. Grab the torque spec for these guys. 8 Newton meters and 19. Okay, and we're going to torque these 4 in the back down, and the front ones are 19 Newton meters. We got a lot done on the engine in this episode. We still have quite a bit to do. We still need to clean up everything and get the accessories, our turbos put on, everything on the intake side. So there's still a lot to do. We're going to take care of that stuff next time and hopefully have this thing ready, if not going into the X5, so we can get it running and back on the road. So I'm super excited for that. Can't wait to drive this thing. If you guys are enjoying the M57 content, don't forget to check out our other projects on the channel. We have the 335D drift build. There's a whole playlist on that. We have the X5, of course, and many other projects that you can check out. So that's it for this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.